What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down with a daytime television host who thinks she understands everything about his career, his choices, and his beliefs? What happens when that host pushes too far, says the wrong thing, and suddenly finds herself face to face with a man who refuses to back down? Today, we're breaking down the most intense confrontation ever captured on live television. A moment so explosive that producers eventually had no choice but to physically remove the host from her own show. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story is going to leave you stunned. The morning of February 15th started like any other day at the View Studios in New York City. Joy Behar arrived early, coffee in hand, skimming through her notes for the day's biggest interview. Denzel Washington was scheduled to appear on the show to promote his latest directorial project, a film already sparking conversation across the country for its unflinching depiction of systemic issues in America. Joy had done her research, or so she believed, and she was ready to make this interview memorable. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to The View," Joy announced to the live studio audience, her trademark smile firmly in place. "We have a very special guest with us today. He's a two-time Academy Award winner, a director, a producer, and someone who has never been afraid to speak his mind about the issues that matter most in our society. Please welcome the legendary Denzel Washington." The audience erupted in applause as Denzel walked onto the set, his presence commanding instant respect. He wore a sharp navy suit, his posture confident yet grounded as he waved to the crowd. He took his seat across from Joy, and the energy in the room shifted. This wasn't just any guest. This was Denzel Washington. Everyone knew something significant was about to unfold. "Denzel, thank you so much for being here," Joy began, her tone warm but carrying a subtle edge. "I have to say, your new film has definitely gotten people talking. Some are calling it your most important work yet, while others have concerns about the message you're trying to send." Denzel leaned back slightly, a calm smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, Joy, I appreciate the invitation. As for the film, I think it speaks for itself. We're telling a story that needs to be told, about real people facing real challenges in this country. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe they need to ask themselves why." "But don't you think," Joy cut in, her voice sharpening, "that someone with your platform and influence has a responsibility to be more careful about the messages you're putting out there? I mean, this film is pretty critical of law enforcement, pretty critical of our justice system. Don't you worry about the impact that might have?" The smile faded from Denzel's face as he leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Careful, Joy. I've been in this industry for over 4 decades. I've played cops, I've played criminals, I've played heroes and villains. But this film isn't about being careful. It's about being truthful. If the truth makes people uncomfortable, that's not my issue. That's theirs." Joy shifted, clearly thrown off. She had interviewed countless celebrities, most of them content to give safe, polished answers to avoid controversy. It was clear Denzel Washington wasn't one of them. "Truthful," she repeated, her tone laced with skepticism. "But whose truth are we talking about here, Denzel? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're pushing a specific narrative, one that paints our police officers and our justice system in a very negative light. And I can't help but wonder, is that really fair?" The atmosphere thickened. Denzel's expression hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice was level but unshakably firm. "Fair, Joy? Let me ask you something. When a young black man gets pulled over for driving in the wrong neighborhood, is that fair? When a family loses their father, their son, their brother to police brutality, and the officer responsible gets a paid vacation? Tell me, is that fair? We're not discussing fiction. We're talking about reality. But surely you can't paint all law enforcement with the same brush," Joy shot back, her voice rising. "There are good cops out there. There are officers who put their lives on the line every day to protect our communities. Don't they deserve better than to be grouped in with the bad ones?" Denzel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the studio fell completely silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Of course there are good officers, Joy, but that's not what this conversation is really about, is it? This is about you trying to put me in a box, trying to paint me as the angry black man who's anti-police, and I'm not playing that game. I'm not putting you in any box, Joy protested, though her tone suggested the opposite. I'm asking legitimate questions about the responsibility that comes with your influence. You have millions of fans who trust you. When you make a film that portrays law enforcement so negatively, don't you think you owe it to them and to the officers themselves to show a more balanced viewpoint? Denzel leaned forward, his eyes locked onto her. Let me explain something about responsibility, Joy. My responsibility is to tell stories that matter, to shine a light on issues people would rather ignore. If you want balance, turn on the evening news. They'll give you all the heroic police stories you want. But that's not the story I'm telling, because right now, that's not the story that needs telling. The tension in the studio grew heavier. Audience members shifted. The other host sat frozen, unsure how to step in as the conversation spiraled into a full confrontation. Joy, either unaware or unconcerned with the growing discomfort, pushed on. "So, your version of the truth is the only one that matters?" she asked, her tone edging towards mockery. "Your perspective outweighs the perspectives of thousands of police officers who risk their lives every day to keep us safe?" That was the moment everything changed. Denzel's calm, steady composure cracked. Not in anger, but in something far more unsettling. A disappointment mixed with a quiet, controlled fury that was more powerful than any outburst could have been. "Joy," he said softly, so softly that the audience had to lean in to hear him, "I think you fundamentally misunderstand what's happening here." The words hung in the room like a coming storm. For the first time since the interview began, Joy seemed to realize she might have gone too far. But instead of pulling back, she doubled down. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said with a condescending smirk. "I understand that you've built a career playing the victim, pointing fingers instead of taking responsibility, and now you want to use your fame to push some anti-establishment agenda. Well, I'm sorry, Denzel, but some of us live in the real world." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Even the production crew hesitated, unsure whether to keep filming. The interview had crossed a line no one expected. But Joy, thinking she finally had the upper hand, kept going. "You sit up there in your ivory tower," she waved a hand dismissively, "making millions, while everyday Americans, including police officers, are struggling to keep their community safe. And then you have the nerve to lecture us about truth and justice? Give me a break." Denzel rose from his seat slowly, his full height casting a shadow across the table. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but carried an undeniable weight. "Joy, listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because I'm only going to say it once." "Oh, here we go," Joy muttered with a shaky laugh, glancing at the audience. "The great Denzel Washington is about to educate us poor, simple people about how the world works." "Sit down," Denzel said quietly, so sharply, so decisively that it sliced through her sarcasm in an instant. For the first time, Joy seemed to register the seriousness of the moment. The smug smile slipped from her face as she caught the look in Denzel's eyes. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was something far more unsettling. Disappointment blended with a quiet, commanding authority that demanded respect. "You want to talk about the real world?" Denzel continued, his voice low but carrying effortlessly across the studio. "Let me tell you about the real world, Joy. The real world is where I grew up, in Mount Vernon, New York, where my father worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. The real world is where my mother cleaned houses for families who wouldn't even let her sit at their dining table." "Denzel, I didn't mean to," Joy began, but he raised a hand, stopping her instantly. "No, you had your chance to talk. Now it's my turn." His tone stayed level, but there was a force beneath it that made the entire studio go still. Not a breath, not a shuffle, not a whisper. "The real world is where young men like me get followed around stores, where they get pulled over for driving a nice car, where they're assumed to be criminals before they say a single word. That's the real world I'm talking about in my film." Joy shifted, clearly regretting her earlier remarks. "I understand that," she said shakily, But surely you can see there are two sides to every story. Two sides? Denzel's voice rose just slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior. Joy, when a man is lying on the ground with a knee on his neck, gasping for air, begging for his life, what's the other side of that story? When a 12-year-old boy is shot within seconds of police arriving? Tell me, what's the other side there? When a woman is killed in her own home by officers who went to the wrong apartment? What's the other side there? The studio went pin-drop silent. Even the production crew froze, captivated by the depth of emotion in Denzel's voice. Joy, shrinking into her chair, finally realized she had ignited something she could no longer steer. I wasn't trying to minimize those tragedies, she stammered, her confidence evaporating. But you have to admit that you're using your platform to push a very one-sided view of law enforcement. Denzel let out a laugh, sharp, humorless. One-sided, Joy? Do you want to know what one-sided looks like? One-sided is when officers who commit crimes get desk duty, while the families of their victims get death threats. One-sided is when peaceful protesters get tear-gassed, but armed militants get escorted away safely. One-sided is when people like you, sitting in this comfortable studio, tell people like me to be more balanced while our communities are under siege. That's not fair, Joy protested, her voice thin and defensive. I have always supported civil rights, equality. I'm one of the good guys here. The good guys? Denzel repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. Joy, do you want to know what one-sided looks like? One-sided is when officers who commit crimes get desk duty, while the families of their victims get death threats. One-sided is when peaceful protesters get tear-gassed, but armed militants get escorted away safely. One-sided is when people like you, sitting in this comfortable studio, tell people like me to be more balanced, while our communities are under siege. That's not fair, Joy protested, her voice thin and defensive. I've always supported civil rights, equality. I'm one of the good guys here. The good guys, Denzel repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. Joy, you've spent the last 15 minutes telling me that the stories I'm telling, stories from my own community, are biased or unfair. You've brushed aside the pain of countless families as one-sided, and yet you think that makes you one of the good guys? Joy looked around desperately for help, from her co-hosts, from the audience, from anyone. But all eyes were on Denzel. She had lost the room, she had lost the show, and she knew it. I think maybe we should take a commercial break, she said weakly, reaching toward her earpiece to signal the control room. No, Denzel said firmly, placing his hand over her earpiece. We're not taking a break. You started this conversation, Joy, and we're going to finish it. You wanted to talk about responsibility. Let's talk about your responsibility. The color drained from Joy's face as she realized there was no escape. She had cornered herself, and Denzel Washington was not the kind of man to let someone off the hook after crossing a line. You have a platform too, Joy. Millions of people watch this show every day. They trust you to ask fair questions, to treat your guests with respect, to foster meaningful dialogue. Instead, you use your platform to ambush people, score cheap political points, embarrass anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow worldview. I was just doing my job, Joy protested, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Your job? Denzel's voice rose, sharp and undeniable now, revealing the anger he had been holding back. Your job is to be a journalist, Joy, not a prosecutor. Your job is to inform your audience, not humiliate your guests. Your job is to seek the truth, not push your own agenda. Joy's face turned bright red. Whether from embarrassment or fury, it was impossible to tell. How dare you lecture me about journalism? I've been doing this longer than you've been making movies. I don't need some Hollywood actor telling me how to do my job. That was the final straw. Denzel's composure, already on a knife's edge, snapped completely. The controlled, dignified man was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes blazed with righteous fury. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of every injustice he had witnessed, every slight endured, every story of pain and struggle from people who looked like him. "Some Hollywood actor?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Joy, let me tell you about this Hollywood actor. This Hollywood actor grew up in a world where he had to be twice as good to get half as much. This Hollywood actor has spent 40 years building a career while people like you questioned whether he deserved every role he earned. This Hollywood actor has used his success to lift others, to tell stories that matter, to shine a light into dark places." Joy tried to interrupt, but Denzel raised his hand. The gesture alone silenced her instantly. "But do you know what really gets me, Joy? It's not that you disagree with me. It's not even that you twist my words or misrepresent my message. What gets me is the disrespect. The casual, thoughtless disrespect you think you can get away with because you're behind that desk and I'm just a guest." The studio was pin-drop silent. Even the camera operators froze, afraid any movement would shatter the tension Denzel had created. Joy sat frozen, mouth slightly open, finally realizing she had gone too far. "You think that being on television for a few years gives you the right to talk down to me? You think because you have a microphone and a camera, you can dismiss my experiences, my community, my truth as one-sided or biased?" "Denzel, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Joy stammered, voice trembling. "I never meant to disrespect you. I have nothing but admiration for your work, your career." "A misunderstanding?" Denzel laughed, but it was cold, void of warmth. "The only misunderstanding here, Joy, is your belief that you could sit across from me, question my integrity, my motivations, my right to tell the stories I want, and think that was acceptable?" Joy glanced toward the control booth, silently pleading for someone to cut to commercial. But the producers were just as transfixed, watching one of the most intense moments in television history unfold. "You want to talk about responsibility?" Denzel leaned in, mere inches from her face. "Here's your responsibility. Your responsibility is to recognize that when you invite someone onto your show, you enter their space, their time, their story. Your responsibility is to come prepared, to ask intelligent questions, to engage in real dialogue. Your responsibility is to treat your guests the same respect you'd want for yourself." "I do treat my guests with respect," Joy protested weakly, her own words sounding unconvincing. "Do you?" Denzel asked, voice dripping with skepticism. "Is that what you call what happened here today?" Denzel asked, his voice low but cutting through the tension. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you invited me onto your show just to ambush me, to make me look like some radical extremist for having the audacity to make a film about real issues affecting real people." Joy's face flushed bright red, and she struggled to maintain any composure. I wasn't trying to," she began, but Denzel cut her off sharply. "Stop," he said firmly. "Just stop. Every word you're saying is making this worse. You're not apologizing. You're not acknowledging what you did wrong. You're just making excuses, trying to justify your behavior." The tension in the room was suffocating. Audience members covered their mouths in shock, while others leaned forward, afraid to miss a single word. Even the other hosts of The View sat frozen, powerless to regain control. "You know what the real tragedy is, Joy?" Denzel's voice dropped, quiet but full of weight, making each word resonate. "The real tragedy is that you had an opportunity today, a real opportunity to have a genuine conversation about real issues, to ask thoughtful questions about art, storytelling, and the responsibility we all have to each other. I was just trying to give viewers a balanced perspective," Joy said desperately, her voice weak, almost whining. "Balanced?" Denzel's voice rose again, and this time the anger was unmistakable. There is nothing balanced about dismissing the experiences of an entire community. Nothing balanced about telling someone their truth is biased. Nothing balanced about using your platform to silence voices that make you uncomfortable. Then something extraordinary happened. The audience, silent until now, began to applaud. It started with a few, then within seconds, the entire studio was on their feet, giving Denzel a standing ovation. Joy looked around in horror, realizing her own audience was cheering the man who had dismantled her on live television. She hissed into her earpiece. "Cut to commercial," she demanded, but the applause was deafening. Denzel wasn't finished. He stood, eyes locked on the main camera, addressing viewers at home with the same intensity he had directed at Joy. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when people in power think they can silence voices that challenge their worldview. This is what happens when journalists forget that their job is to seek truth, not push agendas. This is what happens when respect becomes a foreign concept." Joy frantically gestured to the producers. Finally, two stage managers appeared, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable. "Miss Behar, we need you to come with us." "What?" Joy's voice shrilled.